Today we're going to be exploring a year in the life of three types of poker player. Firstly, the low volume player that plays around 10 to 15,000 hands per month, that has family commitments, work commitments, for whom poker is basically a side hobby that they wish they could devote more time to but just can't. Secondly, we're going to be looking at the mid-volume try-hard reg, maybe they're semi-pro, or for whom poker is just a really serious hobby. That player puts in something like 30 or 40,000 hands per month. And finally, we're going to look at a year in the life of the professional poker player who's high volume, who's playing 80 or 90,000 hands per month. For which of these players is Variance the most shocking? What can you expect if you are one of these archetypes of poker player? In between these explorations, I'm going to be giving you your strategy fix, don't worry. We are playing 200 Russian cash on GG, so after we've looked at a year in the life of one of these players, we'll jump into the live play and explain, and you'll get your strategic fix. If you've been thinking about dipping your feet into the Carrot Corner waters, there's no real better time than now because, well, there was Black Friday, but that's over with now. But the Golden Carrot is live. It's an enormous discount on all of our stuff. It will give you access. The Golden Carrot Pass gives you access to everything on Carrot Corner. If you do want to fully commit to your poker education with the Carrot Poker School, Weapons of War, Cash Injection, and all of our subscription videos and anything we ever put out forever, then get the Golden Carrot. Now let's get to this video and find out what Variance looks like for you. Alright guys, so we're using primedope.com today to measure Variance. This is the true win rate. This is what your win rate would be if you were to play infinity hands, and we've decided that the players we're simulating all have the same win rate of 3 big blinds per 100. This is not a huge win rate, but it's enough that when you add some rake back to it, you can do okay from the games if you run at expectation. And this, as we'll see, is a very big if. Observed win rate, we're going to leave blank for now. That's just we're doing some comparisons. Standard deviation is the measure of volatility in the game. I think their estimates on Prime Dope are slightly too high. Like when I coach people, usually their standard deviation is nowhere near 120 BB per 100, but this is a style thing. The more aggressively you play, the more like redlining and bluffing is a part of your game, the higher that's going to be generally. The more nitty you play, or the nittier the pool you play against, the lower that number is going to be. I've gone for 90, which is on the lower side of the range for No Limit Hold'em 6 max, but isn't like ridiculously low. And we're actually going to simulate a year to start with. I was looking at 2 years earlier as I was playing about with this, but let's simulate a year in the life of the 10k per month player. That's 120,000 hands that we're going to be seeing here. So we'll calculate that. I almost did 12,000, which would have been kind of embarrassing, and I probably wouldn't have even noticed. So let's calculate. We do this like loads of times, right? You get a different spread. This is the break-even line here, where my cursor is. And this is the EV line here. This is what would happen if you ran this out, you know, ad infinitum. We have the best line over thousands of trials, 1,000 trials here, and the worst line over 1,000 trials here. And all the other lines are just random iterations on this graph. So if you picture yourself, maybe you don't need to because you are this person, as a amateur poker player, aspiring to be better, aspiring to play more one day, but currently you have a family, you have a job, you have a life, you just don't have time to play more than about 10,000 hands per month if you're also going to study and watch courses and stuff, which is really important at the start of your development. Definitely recommend an investment approach where you do a lot of study in the early days and then dial up the amount of grinding you're doing relatively soon into your career, but you do want to be lots of study oriented at first. But yeah, like you don't have a lot of time left for poker, right, to put in volume. You get in 10k per month. You're doing well if you can play 10,000 hands per month. That's your target. You're happy with it. You play for a year and this is what happens. You could be anywhere in this graph. So you can imagine that there's a guy in our Discord who's posting in our achievements thread and going, look how well I've done. This is all thanks to Pete. This is thanks to the Carrot Poker School, whatever it may be. And it may be, a lot of it, like to give someone a 3 BB per 100 win rate instead of minus 3 BB. Maybe the Carrot Poker School did do that for them. But the point is that if they are a 3 BB winner, they've still ran like God to be up 86 buy-ins in a year, 8,600 big blinds. And they could have easily been down 1,400 big blinds, and then they wouldn't be making that post, and they wouldn't even think they'd improved, and they'd have thought, what's this really doing for my game, and am I even good at poker? Maybe I should just quit. So the scariest thing about Variance for 6 max online cash game players is the conclusions that they are likely to draw from it, because humans are visual in it. Even if we've seen these simulations before, we're still going to think we did well when we get these results and did badly when we get these results. There's no two ways about it. We're going to form those conclusions. It's extremely rare and difficult to have a graph that's like break even, you're up 47 or 4.7 buy-ins after a year of grinding, for you to then say, yeah, I could be a 3BB winner. You're likely going to say, I'm a stuck break-even player, help me, or I'm a stuck break-even player, I quit. This isn't working for me. So there's this enormous pattern, this discrepancy. You know, if I'd ran terribly for the first 2 years that I took online poker seriously, there's a very good chance that you wouldn't be sitting here watching this video today, because I would have just said, okay, I just played 400,000 hands, which I did play. I remember 1 year where I played 400,000 hands, like way back in the day. That went fairly well for me, and that's what kind of gave me a jump start in poker. If that had gone terribly for me way back in the day, I don't know if you'd be watching this. You might be watching some other guy instead. Maybe there's a parallel universe carrot man called the Parsnip Man who, you know, was trying to make a root vegetable themed training site but ran like really badly at the start of their career and never managed to do it. Poor Parsnip Man. Let's have a minute's silence for Parsnip Man right now. Let's not, because it'll get boring and you'll switch off and no dopamine. You'll click something else. Start watching Solo Costa or something. So let's stay here. Not that that's a bad thing for you to watch, but, you know, let's continue for now. So let's look at another type of poker player now. But first, we're going to jump into the pool. Going to play about 200 Russian cash. Let's get you your strategy fix. Let's watch some live play from me. Okay, guys, so the idea with this video is that we're going to be mixing up the shock, the dismay, the horror of the variance calculator with some in-game strategy, some play and explain to brighten the mood a little bit and get you your daily strategic dose here on Carrot Corner. So let's get into it. So we open King Queen here, we get a call from the small blind and the big blind. I think in this situation we're normally going to be betting, we're going to be going for a smaller sizing than normal when we are multi-way, and that's just going to solely be because there are more nutted hands out against us and people are continuing less wide with the unnutted hands. So when people have a random pair like eights, they're far more likely to fold, and correctly so, three-way than heads up. So you could say that our equity when called is a bit lower, and thus value betting is thinner, and our nut advantage is reduced a bit because the combined enemy is just going to have a good hand a bit more often. On the cleanest of all turns, I am actually just going to size up here and bet 75% pot. I think this is relatively big for a three-way node, but we're just going to be in very, very good shape here. Our equity was extremely hot and cold on different turns there. Like some turns there in the three-way pot when we get called, we're going to just absolutely destroy our equity, and others we're going to boost it significantly. This is really interesting. We get giant check raised. Villain is basically saying that they have some form of set or combo draw, I would imagine, or two pair. I think with this hand over here on the left, we are going to continue to value bet. There's just going to be enough value against weaker ace X, which is the bulk of Villain's range. Even though we block it, there's not a lot of diamond draw check calling turn there. And on the right hand side, I mean, we have like this naked bluff catcher that's either going to be completely dead or slightly ahead of a combo draw. I think Villain's range is exclusively going to be raise calls there for the most part. I'd be very surprised if there were many raise folds. It's just a low incentive spot to do that. And so going to just be expecting to either be like comfortably ahead but not miles ahead or dead. I do think that many of the sets and stuff are going to raise flop, but with a random player behind, it could be a weaker player for all I know. It's possible that there are some slow plays in that node. I do expect to see quite a lot of like combo draw there, very high equity draw, but then again, I don't know. It's still tempting for them just to call those hands. Okay, ace nine, we're just going to be defending out of the big blind here. And nines we're going to be opening. So I think fold is right, for sure. And interesting spot against a recreational. Our hand is definitely higher EV than it should be. And there's a phenomenon going on here in the exploitative domain where the opponents who are aggressive are usually c-betting flop with nothing, and the ones who are passive are continuing to check the turn a lot of the time. So there's this sort of like human filtering that's going on among the pool there, whereby when you face the flop check, it's just a bit more likely you're against the more passive player. We can go one big blind here, we can check. I think both plays are relatively similar. Villain's raising range in this spot's probably going to be 7x. This sizing is absolutely huge. And it's very possible that we induce with this, but to induce a sizing like this is much, much rarer. The huge sizing here from the recreational is generally just going to be greed. So when I bet one big blind on the river, I am planning on calling raises. I'm not planning on calling 20 big blinds though, because, you know, data just shows that recreationals are over bluffing for small raise sizes in that spot and under bluffing for giant raise sizes in that spot. Like, they could have just made it 9 big blinds. Recreational player isn't normally aware of like how percentage pot sizing works in these spots either. They're going to be mainly drawn towards X your bet. So if they go like 8x your bet there, they make it like 8 big blinds. I think that's very overbluffed. They could be turning a lot of stuff into bluffs. But when they go 20x, that to them is gigantic. And I think folding's right against that. So yeah, river, we can check or go 10th pot, really. I think we have that kind of equity. We get raised here. I think ace-jack is going to be a continue in a spot where we're betting huge amounts of our range. I'm not super happy about it, though. I don't think this pool is attacking monotone boards enough. I don't think they're finding enough, like, hair draw bluffs, for example. And I'm not really shocked to see the overbet on the turn, because this is going to be a very equity-driven range on flop. We're definitely underperforming by calling ace-jack on the flop, but to that sizing, I don't know that we're underperforming enough to actually fold the hand. Okay, so moving over now to the enthusiast slash semi-pro slash aspiring pro who puts in, let's say, 35,000 hands per month, which is 420,000 hands per year. We're leaving everything else the same. Their true win rate is 3 big blinds per 100. Let's hit calculate and see what we get here. So we can see right away that for the enthusiast that's playing higher volume, it's very unlikely that they'll have a losing year. The spread shows none of it at all, but there's still a ton of fluctuation from the sun running graphs here that are winning 22,000 big blinds or 220 buy-ins. EV is 120 buy-ins, and this one's winning 34 buy-ins. So that's a huge difference. Like your wife's not going to be too happy if you're like, okay, so my EV, I've calculated out my win rate. Probably we make 120k in a year. We'll be able to do X, Y, and Z. We'll pay off X of the mortgage. It'll be pretty good. Then it's like, oh, hey, sweetie, you won 32k. How am I supposed to raise the children on 32k? So this gets like pretty difficult. Not to say that the wife doesn't also have an income and a job. I'm not trying to imply that you're the sole breadwinner here, but it makes even in a combined partnership arrangement, it makes an enormous impact to the family unit if you're bringing home like a third of your expectation or something. So this is wild. This is no joke. While it's unlikely that you're going to post a losing year, and it could happen, by the way, there we go. Just click the button one more time. So 1 in 40 chance of having a losing year so far over this sample size. Maybe it's less, maybe it's more. We don't really know. But yeah, it's just wild, right? Every time we do this, we get a completely different spread as well. Like, one sample of 20 players looks different to the next. There's just a lot of fluctuation even on that level. And here we go. Like, these guys here had observed win rates that were tiny. They were microscopic. This is what a 3BB per 100 win rate looks like. This guy's winning about a quarter of it to a fifth of it, something like that. So yeah, again, what conclusion do you draw from your poker career when you spend a year playing 35,000 hands a month, you win 220 buy-ins, and the same player won 3,000 big blinds or 30 buy-ins? 220 buy-ins, 30 buy-ins. They can both happen. Or you could get somewhere in between. You're more likely to get somewhere in between, but you will never know your true win rate even after a year of playing 35,000 hands per month. It'll still be miles off, right? Probably. Like, you're going to either be running good or bad. Not too many lines are exactly around EV. Okay, there are a few players that run exactly around EV. But yeah, you have no idea. You have no idea your real win rate. And again, if you think about the trajectory of these players, the ones that have had a really bad year, they might well quit poker. They might well say, okay, this isn't working out. I have to do something else. I tried and I failed. And little did they know that around the corner was some absolutely sun-running 210 plus buy-in year. Imagine you're playing 200 Zoom, right? That's your game, or 200 NL cash games online. So a big blind is $2. And this sample here, they won 24,000 big blinds, or 48k. All right, so that's something. It's not fantastic for a yearly income, but if it's a side hustle for you, that's really, really good. Or you could have just won 4,000 big blinds, or 8k. 48k, 8k, same level of player. So yeah, it's wild. We can spin this a million times. We can see the massive amount of diversity in win rates here that we can expect. You're just not going to know. The good news is that if you do become a bit more of a crusher and you win at double that, which is really, really hard pre-rake back in certain games, it's looking better for you, but still the spread is pretty wild. With that in mind, let's go play some poker. Let's see how this manifests itself over the course of a hand or a session, which is obviously just completely insane. Just for the lulz, by the way, let's say the same 3BB winner played a session of 850 hands, right, at that standard deviation. I mean, it's basically just indistinguishable from a coin flip, right? You're just equally likely to win as you are to lose. Your session can go absolutely any way at all. Even as I click this multiple times, it's not clear that we're looking at a winning player here, is it? So just bear that in mind next time you play. Go easy on yourself, because like over a year at 35k hands per month, you've got very little control of how much you actually win, although you're unlikely to lose if you're 3BB winner. Over a session, you know, you could lose 4 buy-ins, you could win 6 buy-ins. The best possible session here seems to be around 8 or 9 buy-ins. The worst one around the same, minus 7, minus 8. I feel like it can be a lot worse than that, so I wonder if there's something going on there. I feel like the worst, we've all had minus 11 buy-in sessions, right? So maybe this isn't enough standard deviation for this sample size or something like that. I don't know if this is exactly right. I think, I don't know. You can let me know what's going on here, but this feels like it's not actually accurate. Like you can easily, if you run 1,000 sessions, you're gonna have a session of 850 hands where you win more than 8 buy-ins, and you're going to be losing like 15 buy-ins in some sessions as well. So you guys let me know what you think is going on there. I'm not an expert at using this or anything, but yeah, be interested to hear your thoughts. There are a lot of hands that are not GTO opens. They're a little bit losing in GTO, but against tighter looking opponents are going to be really winning from the small blind. All of the hands that are just outside the hand chart, they're losing very little in theory if you open them. And all it takes is for your opponent to be under 3-betting a bit, under defending a bit, and suddenly the EV of these hands is going to soar. The most important factor to how good it is to open a hand in the small blind is the 3-bet percentage of the opponent in that spot. And certain player types, like tight, semi-reg, semi-fish type players, are going to be the most guilty of just under 3-betting and rendering tons of hands in that opening range profitable opens. Okay, so with ace king off here, we open hijack, we get called by big blind. Ace 3-4 is a board where you can play small bet and check mainly, the idea being that villain does hit some stuff that neutralizes the nut advantage a lot here. I think with ace king, we're going to be playing more bet than check. It doesn't really matter what the frequencies are. Either play is going to be fine because on this texture, your ace king isn't craving such a gigantic pot. The question on turn, I think I do always want to bet here against what could be a recreational player. But the question on turn is, and I'm just going to bet small here with the 10s, you can check back here as well. Both plays are very similar. You can get away with range betting this board if you want to play that way, or you can play like an intelligent exploitative checking range against a fish. This spot here, do I want to actually go with overbet in my strategy? And I think the answer is that I do, because in practice, I just think the nutted stuff on flop that's meant to slow play at some frequency, like the 2-pair and stuff, is almost always going to be raising. And the EV of my hand is very, very strong here. My equity is higher, therefore, and I also think that villain is extremely inelastic in a spot like that anyway, where when we bet the king turn, they're going to be folding most of their non-ace-x stuff, regardless of sizing, and continuing ace-x to overbets for the most part. So I think overbet is just by far the most sensible sizing there. In both in theory terms, it's good, and in practice as well. I wouldn't worry about the fact that you block the top 2 cards on the board and start sizing down, start getting desperate to be called at all costs. These are leaks when I see people play that way. Ace Queen, I'm going to be playing this node basically as 3-bet, unless I know someone is playing very well against 3-bets or playing very well in 3-bet pots. I don't really see a reason to start cold calling here without the presence of a really bad player in the big blind. I used to cold call here and just play like a more GTO strategy. Here's a spot where King 6 is borderline, right? In theory, but it's probably just going to be a winning open against a random player without a full stack. Even if they're defending a lot here, they're probably not going to be playing well enough, not 3-betting enough, or playing well enough for it to matter. I'm going to be betting b60 at very high frequency on flop, and I'll go from there. We can already make some better hands fold with this hand. We go for the cheeky sort of underprotected low EV hand stab here on flop because it's just going to be under raised and overfolded. Turn, I think check call is the way to go. While I say it's going to be overfolded, they're still going to be peeling the flop with a lot of random hands. When they check back on turn, it really does reduce the likelihood that this is a recreational that's going to bluff us on river. So I think I prefer some form of block bet on this node. I'm just going to bet about 5th pot here. And I'm going to go very big here with the pocket kings. Yeah, okay. So keeping our block down there is really important when we're losing to a ton of hands. This is an interesting spot. We don't have the rush pot growth. I think the frequency that underpairs bet at is extremely low. If we check, this doesn't seem like a spot where checking is likely to induce a ton of stuff, although if you know this is a recreational player that's really aggro, then you can do some checking here. I'm probably just going to go 3rd pot, half pot turn, shove river, just take a line that does really well against ace-x, because 9 times out of 10, if we do get called down in that spot, it's by ace-x. So that's where targeting comes in, right? Where people say, I'm going to target an ace. And it makes some sense to target an ace when the ace is an enormous part of the stuff that pays you off. But when someone's range is more diverse than that, and there's lots of other hands that matter, that's not going to be so true. Interesting spot here. We check back the flop and turn an 8 here. Now, against this sizing, from what looks like a tighter player, I'm actually expecting this to be pretty equity driven. And I'm also thinking river might just be underbluffed anyway if we slow play. So while in GTO, there's just going to be a lot of slow play on this node, I actually think in real life it's going to be way less good to slow play. I don't think people are finding enough river aggression, and I think they're just equity driven when they lead turn for that sizing mostly. Very, very easy check now. Just hope to somehow have dodged this river, but not to be this time. But yeah, I think fast playing the turn there is a really, really important thing to do in this pool. Generally speaking, people are going to be a bit mergier than they should be, happier to put money in by calling than by bluffing. This is the kind of pool you're in at 200 Russian cash GG. There are some solid players, don't get me wrong, some very good players in this pool, but there are also a lot of people just playing in that manner. Okay, we'll play this ace-10 hand, see if it transpires into anything, and then we'll get back into some more variance calculations for you guys. Hope you're enjoying it so far. Hope it's not putting you off poker entirely. Okay, so let's set out after this hand. I am going to start by just checking everything here. I think check raise is really good with this hand. We're blocking a ton of continues. The question on the turn is, like, what is our level of showdown value here? And I think it's something. I also think fold equity from better hands is not great. Like, there's definitely some combos of 7s, 8s, 5s folding here, but I actually think villain's range is more polar than that for the most part, because people auto-bet a lot of their pocket 7s on flop here. So I am just going to take the showdown route here, expect it to be a bit higher EV than the bluffing route, and just show this hand down. We're going to win enough of the time that this is fine. And yeah, it doesn't really make much sense to me to start blasting away on that turn with minimal equity when called, but a lot of equity in the check-check node. I just think that's a common mistake I see people make. So they say, I'm going to bet this queen because it's a overfolded spot, or it's good for my range, and they're neglecting the fact that with ace-10, you just have a ton of EV on the check branch. Like, if you had nothing there, sure, betting like 3rd pot or something, it's not, and then like blasting river if called, it's not bad as a strategy, but with that much showdown value, and furthermore, showdown value that you're going to realize, it just really doesn't make any sense to lead the turn there with that hand. Checking is better than betting. All right, so this leaves us with the professional, the high volume grinder, playing something like 90,000 hands a month, which is no joke and requires a hell of a lot of time devoted to poker, especially if you're going to work on your game and analyze your play and chat with people and stuff like that, which I'd highly recommend. So here we have the 1,080,000 hand grind that's going to happen across the time frame of a year. We're going to calculate this. What does a year look like for the very high volume pro? Okay, so as we can see, here's the EV line now. We're now winning at 32,000 big blinds or 320 buy-ins, which is quite a lot of buy-ins to net. That's making about 64k at a 200 NL game. At a 500 NL game, you're making, well, a bit over double that. So definitely into the realms of beginning to make a decent living from the game now. But that living, that yearly income, can be incredibly different across different iterations of the graph. So, for example, here, while it's very unlikely that we actually have a break-even year, like this player down here has had, we do have someone that's winning considerably less than expected here. Remember, like less than half actually of what's expected. And if we keep calculating this, yeah, there's still a lot of fluctuation between your very best year where you're winning at 50,000 or 100k at 200 NL and then winning like 28k or 32k. So if you just think about that in terms of what that means for you and your income, that you can't guarantee where you're going to be in a range of making $32,000 a year and $100,000 a year. That's wild. That's like not knowing if you're going to be a doctor or have a job that pays closer to minimum wage. That's like not knowing whether you're going to have the income of a skilled professional or some entry level graduate job. It's extremely different year in, year out. If you play for a few years, it's going to even out a little bit, but a lot of people are not prepared for this when they turn pro and they have certain expectations. They don't have a huge bankroll, they have life pressures, and they're kind of needing things to go really well in the first year. So, the reason I'm bringing this part up to the high volume guys out there is that you may well have your head wrapped around how things are going to go over like a month or 3 months or whatever. You're probably very accustomed to 80,000 hand spells of breaking even or 50,000 hand downswings and stuff like that. You're used to being 40 buy-ins below your previous peak and stuff like that. But are you accustomed to how this goes over millions of hands over a period of years? Are you aware that you can have such a different level of income year in, year out from poker? I mean, you really can. A lot of people that are thinking about going pro are not aware of that, right? The spread is just enormous still, and that's not even at the highest standard deviation. If you're playing PLO, if you're playing heads up, your standard deviations are going to be even higher still, even if it's full ring PLO. The good news out there for you live players is that your standard deviation is going to be a lot lower and your win rate is going to be a lot higher than this. And of course, a lot of pros do have a higher win rate than 3BB per 100, especially after rakeback. So this perhaps paints a less stable picture than what it really is to be a professional poker player these days. I wanted to flag it because I've worked with so many people who have turned pro and then just not been prepared for what Variance has in store for them, either the good or the bad, like to get accustomed to a really good year and think it's the norm when actually they've ran way above expectation, or they have a really bad year and quit or become disheartened or tilt or stop working on their game and or even fall into like a depression. You know, I've seen it happen. A few stats down here then, you can see the expected winnings are 32,000 big blinds or 324 buy-ins, but we can also see a few other stats down here. And what I'd like to draw your attention to is this downswing extents and stretches, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what this means for the high volume player. So what this basically means is that, let's just take something in the middle here. So 47, right? 46.95, 47% of the time the players simulated in this graph were 2,000 big blinds or more below their previous peak. That means like basically half the time the players who were tracked here would have reported that they were in a 20 buy-in downswing or bigger. 11 or 12% of the time, these players would have reported that they are 50 buy-ins or more, 5,000 big blinds or more below their previous peak. So these giant downswings of 50 buy-ins, 30 buy-ins, 20 buy-ins, they're not that uncommon. And almost all the time, people are 1,000 big blinds or 10 buy-ins below their previous peak. So when you do hit a new peak in your graph, it's important to remember that very often you're going to dip down below that again. But this drives people insane. They're like, man, I was making progress and now it's been undone. I'm not as good as I thought. They're freaking out when they go on downswings. Downswings are the norm. A downswing of some magnitude is actually the norm for a poker player, where downswing means just being a certain amount below the previous peak. But as humans, because we're entitled creatures, we like to make the previous peak the sort of reference point and then think it can only be uphill from there. It's not the case at all. If we look at downswing stretches, 28% of the time, these players would have reported that they have been below the previous peak for 100,000 hands or more, if I'm understanding this correctly, and I'm 99% sure that I am. 13.5% of the time, players would have reported being below their previous peak for 200,000 hands or more. It's not uncommon with a 3 big blind per 100 win rate across a million hands to be break even or so for 200,000 hands. That's not that uncommon. It can happen to you, and 100,000 hands happens actually quite a lot. And you know, like the last 20k hands being below your previous peak, that's more than half the time, right? Comfortably. So, going back up to this, when we're simulating these graphs, there's so many ups and downs along the way. Like if you track even one of the sort of better lines here, like I don't know, let's track the sort of light blue one here that's doing quite well, you're still going to see, or maybe better to track an average line, but if you do that and you sort of zoom in on some of these really average lines, what you're going to see is that the ups and downs are quite huge, right? Like take one that ends in the middle, like this orange line here. For a while, it was like really doing terribly. It was like really an outlier towards the bottom. Then it had a sudden giant upswing. Then it broke even and actually lost for another 100,000 hands after this upswing. So yeah, progress is just very, very far from a straight line. And yeah, just people don't understand these facts. They might get it consciously. They might have seen these sims before, but they're not understanding them subconsciously. You really do have to look at a hell of a lot of variant sims, talk to a lot of poker players. But actually, the secret to getting accustomed to this is to live it and go through it and come out the other side. That's really the only way that you get used to this. And I'll be totally honest, like one of the things that drew me towards coaching and having a business educating people in poker rather than being a grinder is that this is brutal. It can be the best thing ever, like the year I had near the start of my career when everything just went right. If that year had gone badly, like I say, it might be Arsnip Corner making this content. It might be a version of me without a beard or with blonde hair. It might be some other dude somewhere else in the world that's bringing you this content right now. There's so many poker players that would have been great who just never stuck it out because they ran badly, and there's poker players that are not very good at all whose son ran for a few years and just made a living for a while and thought they were great. So yeah, a lot of variance, a lot of fluctuation. I guess we should play a little bit more poker, wrap up this session. Hope you've enjoyed it. Pocket. Potatoes. Wait, wrong table. Potatoes. Editor, rain them from the skies. Let's go. Let's get into a hand. Recreational in the small blind 3-bets. Very standard call. I can't imagine that 4-bet is better than call here. What do we know about this recreational? Let's just see 2% 3-bet. Over a smaller sample, but definitely playing in like a pretty standard recreational way. I'm going to use the giant ISO size. Well, it's not that giant, but kind of normal ISO size of 6x out of position here. Very cat limping range in the most part. We're not getting limp raised much. So because we're using like a big equity driven range, I think we just want to pile in money, to be honest. I'm going to check back with 10s here on the flop. It feels bang in the middle. It feels like a disaster to reopen and get raised. I think this is going to be ace king an absolute ton. When villain's range for 3-betting is so tight, the 16 combos of ace king become a gigantic part of it. So we are going to call here, and I'm probably going to call river as well with the 10s because it's just too likely that they have ace king on this node. It's far too likely that they go for a bet here on flop with something like ace queen, kings, or aces. Against third pot, okay, like fine, no problem here. I'm actually going to call on the left here and just go to a flop. So yeah, it does have aces this time, but yeah, third pot in the river. Need 20% pot entitlement there. Wouldn't level yourself. You're against a recreational player. They could think that third pot is like a big bet or a normal size bet or whatever. Sometimes I think in terms of big blinds. So against check, bet there, when so much of their range is ace king, we definitely want to just call 10s on the river there. Don't worry about being value owned or milked or whatever. Like it's going to happen a lot. And indeed, it can happen like 80% of the time there, and it's still fine. So on the paired board, I'm not really going to be playing any raise. I'm just going to be playing call. This is a reg. It looks like... I don't know what the 3 gold stars mean. You can tell me in the comments if they've won some tournament sometime. That probably means they're terrible if they play tournaments, right? But no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, ace-jack is... You can play raises on certain boards with this, even in position. Here, I think our hand is really quite big. And while checking is a thing in theory, I think I'm just going to go for all the money here over 2 streets. My sizing on this node is just really going to be a bigger bet or a check. I don't see the point in playing smaller bets here. And with king jack, we ISO and then face this lead. This is really weird. Okay, we kind of timed down because we're focusing on this table and commentating. I don't think folding is a disaster there against half pot. I think it's going to be pretty... Half pot donk's going to be a lot more equity driven than a check. Like some people are like, oh, you should ignore donk, just treat it like a check. If it's a tiny donk of 1 big blind into 7, you can treat the SPR like a check, but actually any donking range in almost any pool is going to be mergier and more linear and just higher equity than a checking range for the most part. It doesn't apply to every human, but it applies to the pool globally. So when you face the half pot lead there and you have a hand like King Jack, it's sort of the perfect hand to start raising with. But honestly, it's not a super high fold equity spot in this field because a lot of people are just playing merged, high equity driven leading ranges. So I don't think folding's actually too bad there, even though our hand has something going for it and we're in position and we're getting 3-1. I think it's really close. Okay, so we defend Queen Jack this time out the big blind, and we're going to go for check. This is going to be a very, very frequent check raise. I will call it a low frequency though, because I don't have a reason to play completely exploitatively, and we do roll a call this time, but I'm mostly check raising this hand. And it's possible it's just better to check raise. Actually, it's possible. Like, I would err on the side of check raising if I'm playing lower stakes for sure. Against a reg in this game, I'm not so bothered, but certainly at lower stakes, I would err on the side of just check raising that hand pure, because people are going to be range betting and not really knowing how to defend having range bet. At these stakes, they have a bit of a better idea. At least the regs do. Very easy fold with the gutter against 2x pot on turn. Good sizing from villain on double flush draw where we don't complete a ton of nutted stuff on the 8. So I think 2x pot makes a lot of sense there. If you've learned how to do that as your turn barrel, then it's a solid sizing for the node. But what I'm trying to show you in this live play as well is just, we've seen how variance works in this video over a long sample, and in the short term there are just so many different manifestations of a hand. There are so many parts of your range you can have, so many runouts, and so many different parts of the opponent's range that you can run into, and then you have like the pattern of that over a session. So when you're playing a poker session and you're a winning player, you might have like a 54% chance of having a winning session or something like that. Going to be taking the 3-bet node here every time with the King 10 suited against what looks to be a recreational. They're not going to 4-bet bluff enough, usually. They're going to call and then not play that well in a 3-bet pot. Very high EV node for us. We have 9s here as well, which might turn into something. So I'm going to set out next hand, do a little summary conclusion. I think reopening 9s in the small blind here for the 3-bet is not ideal at this stack depth. I think call is going to overperform. And on the flop here, we have the kind of hand that starts becoming a bluff later. I think fold equity generally in these spots, if we start tripling, is not that great, even though it's a really underbluff spot. I'm actually going to check for a bit of transparency here. I think our opponent's incredibly likely just to tell us what they have almost every single time. And, people bet for information, but you should really be checking for information. This is a very clear raise for me, and I'll explain why. We are free rolling villain on a diamond river here, like absolutely free rolling them. And I think their bluff frequency here will be very low. I'm actually shocked to see the snap fold there. I'm absolutely shocked that someone tried to bluff me on that node. Not only is it kind of just suicidal anyway, because we have so many King X in range and 2-parent sets sometimes, but it's also just like so rare and surprising. Go for the check again here with the 9s. Gonna be a very comfortable check call. King River is not the worst, and ace would be worse. There's more ace X playing that way in the opponent's range than King X, I would think, when they check back flop. But still, not a great spot. I don't think bluff catching that river is too unreasonable though. Alright, so that takes us to the end of the live sweat. Let's do a little outro now, a little conclusion. Some of you might be a bit disheartened right now watching this video. You might even be wondering, is it even worth it to try and be a poker player, given I have such little control over the outcome of even quite long periods of time? But I don't think that's the right conclusion to take, because there's a lot of beauty in this game, and becoming good at it in and of itself is a real achievement. Any progress you make in poker increases your expected value for the rest of your poker career. If you're going to play poker for another 25, 30 years of your life, the next 2 years might not be that significant. It can feel like everything, but it's not that significant. And remember, we've been focusing on the negative side of this, the kind of worst case scenario thinking. You could just have an amazing sun run year this year. You could perform at 3 times the profit than what your true win rate entitles you to over the long term. That's very possible as well. It's not that poker is going to be way worse for you than you think, or you're going to run bad. It's just that it's way more volatile than you think. You might run really good, you might run really bad. The point is that you just have to accept that it's way more out of control than your brain wants to accept it is. And if you can make peace with that, I hope your priorities and your goals can align and shift to a point where you're actually more focused on the day-to-day grind, the getting better, not taking feedback from sessions or weeks or months or even a year of your career in a graph form, but taking feedback from what makes sense to you, how well you can analyze hands, how well your coach or peers tell you you're playing, that kind of thing. There are way better ways to map out your progress in poker than just your results. So if you do crush and sunrun over the next 6 months, a little humility, you're probably running above expectation. If you get destroyed, you're probably running below expectation. It will change at some point. Try and love poker for what it is, not just the graph over the next 200, 300, or even 1,080,000 hands, as we've seen. All right, guys, it's carrotcorner.com for everything from us, including our brand new Golden Carrot package deal. Check it out if you want to invest in your poker future so that you can withstand the tides of variance and give yourself a better expectation, even if we can't guarantee you a winning month or even a winning year. All right, see you next time. Bye for now.